The second scripture reading for this morning comes to us from the first chapter, and part of the second chapter, of the book of Genesis. Rest assured, we will not be doing the whole thing. It is excerpted. But if you would like to read along, you will find a slightly different translation in your pew Bibles, and it begins on page 1, as Genesis often does. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome and separated waters that were under the dome from waters that were above the dome, and it was so. And God said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. Then God said, "Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind that bear fruit with seed in it." And it was so. And God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky." And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things, and wild animals of the earth of every kind." And it was so. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." God said, "See, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw everything that God had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work that she had accomplished. Thanks be to God. May we receive a blessing from the experiences of Scripture on this morning. May they guide and focus the meditations of our hearts and the words of my lips. In the beginning. A beginning is a good place to start, so the song says. Genesis. It is a starting point for us, or perhaps it is a restarting point for us. It's like a rebranding almost. It's like we're saying we're under new management, so to speak. In the beginning. Now, last week, Reverend Glennis brought us to the point of in the beginning, God. We went there with her. And some people afterwards said that if it didn't work out with me, they'd like to have her come back. She said if we could grow the church big enough, she'd consider coming down. Be a co-pastor. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Glennis and I are two peas in a pod. In the beginning, God. And as we think of these new beginnings, these in the beginning moments in this whole month of July, as I'm slowly getting my feet under me and really counting on the goodness of the people in this congregation, we move into, in the beginning, God said. God said. Speech is a wonderful sort of tool, and we know that speech is not limited to that which comes out of our lips. We are capable of communicating in many different ways. We can use our hands, and if any of you have ever been a misbehaving child, I'm not going to ask you to raise hands because I don't, but you know you have seen from an adult somewhere that communication that does not involve hands, but usually an eyebrow that comes up, or maybe two that come together. We don't need to necessarily voice our communication. Scripture uses this kind of language of hearing and speaking, but we should always imagine that, unless it's someone actually talking to us, that it is more than just voicing. But in the beginning, God said. And to say something, we have to have something to say. For God to actually bring something into being, there must be that thing, or at least a vision and an understanding of that thing within God already. God had pictured creation, this in the beginning moment, this first creation story that is broken into 7 days and recorded to tell us something about God. Recorded at a time when the people Israel were in exile in Babylon and were surrounded by cultures and deities that were just very different from their own. Deities that supposedly brought creation into being through violence and through division, through the slaying of one that other life might come into being. Instead, we have this creation story where God spoke and said and envisioned what it is that would come into being. God voiced and manifested, made real that which was in God already. Manifested it. And that which is, bless you, that which is manifested is experienced beyond the maker. When we make something, when we have this creative urge within us, and then we get it outside of us, it's manifested, it's made real. Maybe it's a song that is to be sung. Maybe it's a painting that is painted, a photograph that is imaged. Maybe it's not even any of those sort of traditional arts. Maybe it's something more concrete even than that. Maybe it is the machine that we are making or the tool itself that is coming out of the machine. Maybe it's the classroom setting, but when we manifest that which is within us and make it real, when it gets outside of us, it is now in some ways beyond our control. I like the idea of cats. I'm a cat person. The manifestation of cats, whole different ballgame. Can't control a kitty cat. In my mind, perfect. In reality, litter boxes. Very different sort of thing. So when we manifest something, it goes outside of us and it is now out of our control. Consider how scary that is, to give over authority in that way, to allow for some sort of autonomy. And think about how rewarding it is as well to share in that creative experience. And God said, God took what was inside and manifested it and put it outside of God's self, gave up some of that authority so that creation could have some autonomy, even the creeping things, which you notice got repeated several times. The creeping things that creep along the ground. And had the Hebrew had the verb, and it still might, the adverb, it might have said the creeping things that creepily creep along the ground. Creepy. But God did that. God spoke and manifested. God put it out there. The world came into being because God had that creative impulse. Now, if we have ever made anything in our lives, especially if we can remember back to those early days in preschool where you got the paints on your fingers and hands, or maybe later in life when you're painting a room and you got paint on your fingers and your hands and you're doing this stuff. The thing that is made bears a mark of the maker. Our fingerprints are there in some way, shape, or form. If we are taking pictures, if we are making music, we have our own lilt to how we play and interpret. We have our own way of punctuating and enunciating and emphasizing the syllable. And it makes it our own. It shows something of the maker. When God created, when God said, "Let there be," and it was, there is a mark of the Maker upon it, including upon human beings. And we as human beings, as people of faith, are given the authority and the autonomy to make our own mark. As we create, as we manifest, as we speak things into being. And so whatever shall we do on this day in the beginning, because it's not just in the beginning God anymore, it's in the beginning God and us. How are we on this day to be church, since we are a people post-resurrection? And as we wrestle with that question, perhaps we realize that we have been fortunate enough to hear. And again, this is one of those places where we're not just talking about hearing with our ears, we're talking about the things that come into our hearts and our souls and our minds, the ways that we are stirred. And perhaps we have been fortunate enough to hear a "and God said" sort of thing. Hearing God. Something else about speaking there, speaking and hearing. Yes, this is something that ministers rely on over and over and over again, because the sermon that is typed is not a sermon at all. Just like the speech that is written is not a speech. The play that is written is not a play. It is in the performance that it comes to life. It is in the indwelling of the breath. It is in the movement of the wind, the ruach, as the Hebrew puts it in the creation story. It is the movement of the Spirit that brings it into being. And God spoke. And it came into being. Yes. That desire, that need to create that is in us, that mark of the Maker, that indwelling of the Spirit, that thing that is just driving us to go and do and be perhaps even the best church we know how to be today. Yes, it is God's Spirit already blowing across the face of the deep. Y'all wonder why we don't have candles up here? This is why we don't have candles. If I'm wearing a linen robe, but God's Spirit already blowing over the face of the deep, it's the Ruach. It is the thing that goes over chaos. There is chaos in the world. And it is the thing that goes over creation as well. It's this thing that is there and is already inspiring the creative acts. It is already manifesting the creative acts. It is the thing that is driving the voice almost. And that Spirit is indwelling and inspiring us if we dare to open our hearts and our minds and our souls to the movement of that breath. Breathing is important. I recommend it. 4 out of 4 doctors do as well. But it's not just in our tradition that breathing is important. Humans have understood how important it is to be part of that ruach, that wind, that breathing, that indwelling of the Spirit. Traditions around the world talk about breathing. Traditions that we don't even identify as faith traditions talk about breathing. Breathing. In the beginning, the moving of the Spirit. In the beginning, God, and the moving of the Spirit. In the beginning, and God said. In the beginning, God said. In this beginning, today, God and the people of Christ in God. What are we going to manifest, to create, to bring forth into this world? God saw it was good. Thanks be to God, and amen.